In the last couple of movies, we've been looking at how to get values into a function and return values back out of a function. But I want to talk a little bit now about another way that we can accomplish the same thing using something called globals. Let's go ahead and create ourselves a new file. If you want to go ahead and keep using the same functions file, that's fine. It's just getting a little bit crowded for me. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save as with my functions. And I'm just going to call this one functions2. And then save that. And let's go ahead and clear all of this out. There we go. And I'll just call it functions2 so that I see the difference. So we already saw how we could have a simple function where the variables outside the function didn't have any bearing on the variables inside the function. And the best example of that was when we had the sum taking place, where we were adding two togethers together and we set a variable sum, but then when we exited the function, it didn't know what sum was until we actually returned a value for sum out of the function. But there's another choice that we could use. I'm going to make a PHP block here, and let's define a function. Let's say this one's going to be function foo. And it's not going to take any arguments, but inside the function, it's going to set another variable called bar. And we're going to set bar equal to inside. And before we get into that function, let's go ahead and set bar equal to outside. So now we have an outside value and an inside value. And if we call the function foo, and we echo back the value of bar, and I'll go ahead and put a BR tag on the end of that so it'll come back nice and clean. We know what we should get. Take a look at that code and give it your best guess whether it's going to come back with outside or inside. And then let's go over to the browser and let's take a look. So functions2, and it comes back with outside. So take a look there. It's outside is what's returned because bar inside had no relationship to bar that was on the outside. Now we know we could have done this differently. Let's go ahead and take our whole block of PHP code here, and let's go and we'll do a BR tag, and I'll go ahead and put a comment here and say, we know this works. And then we could have instead passed in the value of bar and returned back out the value of bar, and we could have passed in a value here, that would have been the value outside at the time, and we could have caught the results here by saying bar equals. And we know that that would also work. That's how we were doing it before when we were passing values in and returning them back out. Now, we also, though, have seen that this bar here has no relationship to the bar that's on the outside. This could just as easily have been var. And it won't make any difference. We can go ahead and try that in our browser and see. Let's just save that page and load it up. Won't let me redeclare foo. That's an obvious mistake. So we're going to just call this one foo2 so that we can call it twice. And there we go. Now we have outside and inside. We've declared it the way that we're used to working with it. But there's another way that we can do it. And this is going to be using globals. And I'm going to go ahead and just put that here so we can see the difference. Now, to declare a global, bar here that is on the outside is already a global. It has global scope. We're working with it in the global world of PHP. Whatever happens inside of the function is considered a local variable. It's local only to the function. And because we've declared it in the function, it doesn't exist in the global scope. It only exists in the local scope. But we can change that by simply saying global bar. Now we've told it, pull in that global variable bar. Go outside of the function. Before we get started with things, go ahead and go outside the function, grab the variable for bar at the global scope, and pull that in so I can use it inside the function. And then, when it's done, any changes that we make to bar inside the function are going to be to that variable. Let's save it, and let's go try that over here and reload it, and you'll see that now we get inside there as well, because now we're talking about that global variable. So I just want you to see this as another way. If we have a variable that exists outside, and we want to affect a change on that global variable, then we can pull it inside to temporarily work with it. So we can have functions that act on global variables. Now you want to be careful with this, obviously, because once you declare something global, you're affecting what's happened outside. So use it with caution. You might be better off passing in a variable like we did down here, where we said we know this works, instead of we know this works, I'm now going to change this to say using local variables, arguments, and return values. That's the other way to do it. And you might find that that's a better way for you to make sure that you're keeping track of these values as they move around inside your scripts. But if there's something that you know, all right, I'm going to be working with this a lot, or I know I want to affect a global change on it, I'm going to be cautious about it, then it's fine to go ahead and declare it this way and to work with it as a global variable. Now, I don't end up having to use globals that much when I program. My style of programming is that I tend to prefer this method, and I probably use only a dozen global variables calls inside my functions when I'm programming. But there's no reason you can't adopt the other style instead. You should go ahead and use whichever one works for you. Now, the reality is when we start developing larger websites, a lot of times the global and the important information that we're working with is actually going to go someplace else. It's actually going to come from a database. It's going to come from a cookie or a session. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to want to pass into the functions and maybe pull back out. But still, global would work on those as well. It's a stylistic choice that you'll have to make. And now we're ready to look at how we can set some default values to the arguments that get passed into a function so that a function can have some reasonable defaults set in case the user doesn't pass in information or pass in arguments. And we'll do that in the next movie.